I'd like to thank you, first of all, to Pia and Fredrik, who has invited me to this event. As you can see from the presentation, I am not an official representative of the exopolitics movement. My home base is the UFO research community. And presently I am vice chairman for Ufos Sweden, the national organization in Sweden. And I am also one of the founders of and presently director of Archives for UFO Research, situated in Norrköping in Sweden. And as you can see in this picture here, it is the largest UFO archive in the world. You don't have to go to Paris or New York or Chicago to look at the largest archive. You have to come to Norrköping in Sweden, which many journalists find rather fantastic. But why dedicate or why create the largest UFO archive in the world? Why? And why spend 40 plus years investigating something that mainstream science and many people regard as simple nonsense or fantasy? Well, I don't regard this subject as nonsense and fantasy. I've been in it for, as I said, 40 plus years. And I think this is a subject that will have tremendous implications in the future. I would say that history is on our side, we who delve into this subject. Of course, most scientists would not agree with me, especially not in Sweden. We have the Swedish skeptical movement. They tell me you should close down the archive. It's meaningless. Close down the archive and stop researching UFOs and do something useful instead, like bird watching. Well, I've done a lot of bird watching in my life, but it was other kind of birds, of course. There are many kinds of birds, you know. I will try to give you my perspective on this subject from a Swedish viewpoint, from a research viewpoint, and my personal viewpoint after having studied this for so long, for so many years. And I will first show you some interesting cases just to show the complexity of this enigma, the enormously complex enigma that this is. And then I will also show how we have built this archive and how we are working in Sweden. So let's start with some cases that I have investigated myself. This observation was done in a little town called Björkvik in September 1989. And it was a mother and her daughter, Kerstin Jonsson and Tina Jonsson. They were driving in a car on their way home in this little community, and they saw from about some 100 meters an object just above the treetops, hovering. And the mother, Kerstin, very slowly drove closer to this object hovering, and she stopped and parked just, as you can see here, just below this object. They had this, they saw it, it could have been, say, 12, 15 meters up in the sky. And see it very clearly. It's obviously physical craft, metallic, windows that there is a light coming from. There is no sound. And the mother, who is, I think, very brave, opened the door and tried to step out to see more of this object. But her daughter, who was 13 years at the time and were in the back seat, she became so frightened that she started to cry and said, "Mama, I want to go home. Don't go out." So she had to close the door again. And when she did this, she could see this craft tilting slightly. And she saw that there were windows, and then it just slightly goes away over the woods and disappears. And they go home and tell this to the rest of the family. Now, the interesting thing with this case is that here we have two witnesses, but I know that there were at least 17 witnesses who saw this object at very close range. But they do not dare to talk to us. They don't even want to talk to us. They have written a letter anonymously to me and telling what they saw. They saw this object from the same object from over a lake at the same time. But I think that the interesting thing is they don't even dare to talk to me about it. And this is a problem, this self-censorship, which comes up very often in close encounter cases. And Tina and Kerstin has told me also that if they knew how the press would have treated this subject, how they were treated in the press, they would never have talked about it. I think this is very sad, really, and it's a problem. Almost every time when I have a lecture somewhere in Sweden, someone comes up afterwards and say, "I want to talk to you privately," and they give me very often very interesting information, interesting cases, but they say, "Don't mention my name," and often I can't even get their phone numbers or their address. They just tell me this. They just tell me this is the way it is. I don't want any more involvement in it. This is a problem for us who are into research. And here you have the witnesses pointing to the sky where the craft was seen. Classical close observations, we have hundreds in Sweden, and of course all over the world. Another case. This was a military pilot. His name was Sven Hjalmarsson. He was on a military exercise in the summer of 1977, and ground radar noticed an unidentified target outside the island of Öland in the Baltic Sea. And Sven was ordered to investigate this object. So he changes his course and goes towards this object. When he comes closer, he can also see it on his own radar, and he goes full speed to try to come closer to this object. But when he is closer, suddenly it just stands still, and suddenly it just zooms straight up in the sky and disappears, and he has no chance to follow it. But the interesting thing, when he landed, he said, "I didn't see anything." He denied that any type of observation for his military chiefs, so to say. And when we interviewed him a couple of years after this, we have a taped interview. We asked, why didn't you tell this to your boss? "Well, I didn't want to be confronted with a military psychiatrist," was his answer. Now this is interesting. A Swedish military pilot goes after an unidentified object, and he doesn't want to talk to it even in his career, so to speak. But he talked to us. Unfortunately, he died a couple of years in a helicopter accident, but his case is very interesting. But here we have, again, this with self-censorship. So many people who have close observations do not dare to talk about it because of fear. This is only fear, of course. What will happen? And I can understand it. It's not easy to be made a fool in the press or something like this. This is a problem. This is the problem for us who are into this type of research. Many, many observations and good close encounters just sort of go down the drain because we can't talk to them, to witnesses. I'll give you another case which is very special. I have concentrated on the most controversial aspect of this enigma, and that is the close encounter cases and the physical contact cases with alien beings who look like us, almost like us. And of course you can understand this is the most difficult thing to investigate, with so many fantastic rumors. And of course there are many people who are on drugs who tell these things. There are people who have psychological problems. There are people in it for money also, of course. and I've encountered all of these. But I have also encountered or investigated, say, 3, 4, or 5 very, very special physical contact cases, which I find extremely puzzling, and I haven't found an explanation for them. I can't say that they are evidence that we are visited by someone, but they are truly, for me, very puzzling. And I'll give you one example. This case is a Swedish lady. I call her Anna because she doesn't want her name to be published as long as she is alive. She's 90 years old today, living in Stockholm. She has lived a very special life, been all over the world. I think she has dined with diplomats, she knows film stars, presidents, or so on. She has lived a sort of high society life. And everything started in 1949 when she and some friends had a dinner at their cottage in Vindö in the Stockholm archipelago. And Anna went out and she should fetch something for the dinner. And she saw a light coming towards her from the sea, and it stopped very close to the shore. So she called for everybody else. There were 12 people there. She called for them, and everybody came out, and they looked at this very strange light which was just hovering near the shore. They couldn't see any craft or something, but just a strange light. And they discussed what it could be. And suddenly this light just goes straight up in the sky very fast and disappears. And this was in 48 or 49. She is not absolutely sure that. So we have to move 10 years later. And she is now staying in Mexico with her new husband. She remarried in 1958 with a man who was involved in an industrialist. He was part of a large combustion engineering firm in Mexico. And one day this man came home to Anna and said, "I have met a very special man today at my work. And we should meet him. He's a very special man. He's super intelligent. We should really have a nice dinner together." And this dinner is arranged. And this man, who is called Ben Austin, he is living in Guatemala, about 2 hours drive from Guatemala City. So Anna and her husband goes to a hotel in Guatemala City, where they are picked up by 2 servants from this Ben Austin. And they drive out, far out in the country, to a small bungalow for a formal dinner. And it's a normal dinner, nothing special. After dinner, this man says to the servants, you can leave now, it's okay. And they start an after-dinner chat. And suddenly he says to Anna, "You are interested in UFOs." And she says, No, I'm not. Because she has never told her new husband about the UFO experience. He doesn't know anything about it. But this man who has invited them for dinner says, "Yes, you are. You are interested in UFOs. You have even seen a UFO. You saw us when we came in at your bungalow in the Stockholm archipelago. We came in from the east, and you observed us." And he says this after the dinner. And Anna says, "I was completely shocked. I didn't know what to say. I was really scared," she says. "How could this man know something that even my husband didn't know?" And they start talking about this, and this man explains, "I'm not from here. I am stationed here to sort of keep an eye on you, what you're doing on this planet, that you're not destroying it totally." And of course, Anna doesn't know what to think about this. It's a total absurd situation. She is used to meet people from all over the world, in all walks of life, and here you have a man who says, I am not from here, and who has told her about her observations, which is very strange. This man says, yes, I'm not from here. I have a Scottish passport, because it's the easiest way to get passports on your planet is through Scotland. There are so many dialects. That's his explanation. And he's not very tall. He's about 150 centimeters tall. And he has a rather strange suntan. It's not a normal suntan. He could be an ordinary, anybody from Sweden or anybody. He has dark hair, no beard, and he's rather stocky. He's muscular. And they keep on discussing, talk about this for a while, and then this man says suddenly, would you like to take a trip in our saucer? And Anna says, no, I got my children here, I don't want to go anywhere. But her husband says, who is an engineer, yeah, that would be really interesting. And so it comes up that Anna goes back to the hotel in Guatemala City, and they say, we will deliver your husband at 6 o'clock tomorrow morning at the hotel. So she goes and waits for her husband. Of course, he can't sleep because this is a totally bizarre situation. And he comes home at 6 o'clock, and he is very upset, very, very upset. He's white as a sheet, very upset, and he tries to explain what has happened. He said, it was incredible. This was fantastic. And he said, they went behind this bungalow, this man and him, and there was a small craft, a flying saucer, on 3 legs, tripod legs, rather small. They went under this, on the stairs, up in the craft. It could take 2 or 3 people maximum. And he said the start engine was very odd. It was a very, very small one. It was like a small pyramid. And when they used this one, he heard a small sound, and then they went away up, and there was no sound. There were windows also in this craft. It was an ordinary flying saucer type. But then Anna, of course, wanted to know more. You must tell me what happened. Did you really flying a flying saucer? She was skeptical. I can't really, did you really do that? And then he became angry and said, if you don't believe me, I will never, ever talk about this again. And he didn't. And something happened to this man, because when he came home, his eyes had changed from blue to black, which was very strange. And his manner changed. He became very aggressive after this. They lived together about 6 years after this, but he became very aggressive, very brutal, and he beat her up very badly. So she had to flee with her children back to Sweden again in 1966. And they met one time after this in 1998 at the funeral of their son. And then her former husband said, I'm sorry for what happened that time, but that experience destroyed my life. That's all I can say. And when she looked at him then, his eyes were blue again. They were not black as before. That's the story. And Anna says, there's one thing I regret in my life. Why didn't I go back and take a look at the saucer myself? Why didn't I follow it? I would have liked to have seen it. She said, I don't know if this man came from outer space or what. This is what I experienced. So there you have a contact case. And you see, when you have all these aspects of the UFO enigma, you understand that this is not an easy thing to delve into. How are we going to work with this subject? It's not just a scientific problem. It's an intelligence problem. It's a political problem. It's a religious problem. It has enormous implications. This is one of the cases I have investigated, physical contact cases. There are others that I have written up about in my books, but I just give you an example of the problem you can encounter when you investigate these things. So who shall do the UFO research then? How shall we do this? I think this is not an easy question. There are several agendas we can work, several areas. We can work in different ways with this. First of all, who should do this? Shall we, the state, the government? Well, I don't know how the government would treat a case like the last one I talked about. The military? Well, maybe. And then we have private institutions, like Ufos Sweden or Archives for UFO Research. Who shall do the research? What is the best way to deal with this? We have chosen private research in Sweden. We have chosen to do this ourselves because this subject is so controversial. It is scientifically controversial, of course. Try to get a scientist in Sweden to engage in this is very, very difficult. Fear is the normal reaction. And it's militarily controversial, of course. Politically controversial, yes. I can't hardly imagine any politician in Sweden who would stand up and say, I think this is an important subject, let's do research on this. He would get laughed out of his political career, I think, at least in Sweden. I'm talking about Sweden. There may be another situation in other places. And it's religiously controversial. Even in the very secular state of Sweden. And I noticed this a couple of years ago when I visited my physiotherapist. I have a bad back. And we used to talk about everything. And one time he asked me, oh, what do you do on your free time, on your spare time? And I said, oh, well, I'm doing UFO research. And then he became very quiet and said, you know you are working with demons. And I didn't know what to say. And he was engaged in his Swedish religious movement. I think it was the Seventh-day Adventists or something. But his attitude was so clear. You are working with demons. And our conversation was not so easy after that, I can say. But these are the reasons that we try to do it ourselves. We do the research ourselves. That's the way we are trying to do it in Sweden so far. And one thing, maybe some of you know of the ghost rockets, or have heard of the ghost rockets. Sweden has a very special, Sweden was the first country with a flap that you had many observations of strange craft. In 1946, there was 1,000 documented observations of missile types like this over Sweden, which often went on, they crashed in lakes, and the military looked for them but never found anything. This happens even today. There are the same type of cases happening in Sweden today. And why just in Sweden, we don't know. But last week we did an expedition to Lake Namajaure in the north of Sweden with 15 people, 2 professional divers, to try to find one of these strange craft that landed on Lake Namajaure in 1980. It was this couple here, Bo and Liz Berg, who in the 31st of July 1980 saw this type of missile, or whatever it is, come down over the lake and make a 180-degree turn and landed, not crashed, it landed on the lake and sank to the bottom. And we found this in the military archives first. And so last week we did an expedition to try to find it. And here you have the lake, Lake Namajaure, and here you have the boats we used. Because we would, of course, would like to try to find this And here you have the divers on their way. We didn't find anything because there was mud, several meters of mud on the bottom. And we will do another expedition when we have enough money to try to see if we can find anything on the bottom of this lake. But this is a very typical observation for Sweden, and we don't know why just Sweden. These rather small missile type of craft pass over Sweden. And we had one on the 6th of July was the last. We really don't know what this is, and the military don't know, of course. Here you have one of the divers also.
The size of these rocket?
Sorry?
The size?
Yeah, rather small, about 5 meters or something, yes. So, but they have been observed in 1946, and that's the special. The military thought in 1946 that perhaps this was Russian or something. But nobody knows, and we don't know. Okay, our ideology, or the way we think, we call it third way ufology. We are neither skeptical debunkers nor uncritical believers, but we try to keep an open mind and investigate all cases. We do field investigation, we try to have as good facts as possible and as much expert knowledge as possible, and we try to do it ourselves. That's our way in Sweden. I wouldn't say that this is the absolute right way, but it's the way we do it. But of course, it is a tricky problem. I don't know how many of you have read Jacques Vallée. You should, if you haven't. Very interesting writer. And he often talks about forbidden science, that this subject is a forbidden science. And that's, you can say it is a forbidden science in many respects. But Jacques Vallée also points to, shows that this is also an intelligence problem. When you have these very special close encounter cases and contact cases, if somebody else is around, then science is not enough. Then you have to think in different ways, almost like the intelligence organizations work. So it is a tricky problem. So I'll show how we did it in Sweden, how we started, and how we built up the largest archive in the world. Well, we started very young. We were three young lads, and I'm to the left, in case you want to know. And it's my partner, Kjell Jonsson, and Anders Liljegren here. In 1973, we came together and said, let's try to build up the base for UFO research in Sweden. So we started an informal group, small informal group. We call it Arbetsgruppen för ufologi, AFU, Working Group for Ufology. And we started a small magazine, published our cases, and so we called it The Ufologist. It was 1974 here. And we started in 1974 to build the archive. My colleague here, Kjell Jonsson, to the left, he was like myself, a librarian, and we were bookish, that's the way you look at it. We started to collect books. We said, if you're going to do your research on this, you need material. You need books, you need magazines, you need material, organized, structured. So we started a small lending library in his one-room apartment, two bookshelves. That was the start of the largest archive in the world. I think that's rather fantastic. We had 300 books from the beginning. And it's me to the right there. And this man here, Lennart Johansson, he was the first donator to this archive. He donated about 250 books to us, and that started the archive. I started a newsletter in 1975. And I wrote, in the first newsletter, I wrote like this, that we are laying the foundation for what we hope will develop to a recognized special library for UFO literature in Sweden. That was the hope in 1975. Of course, we didn't know that we were going to be the largest in the world then. We had a lot of discussions in the 1970s, ideological discussions about this subject, what to think and how to work with this. And we were influenced very much by Jacques Vallée and John Keel, two American authors, which I guess many of you have read. And they open new ways to think about this subject. They were open to other theories besides the extraterrestrial, which was interesting. They also looked at comparative studies, how in folklore, comparing religious visions. We heard about Fatima for a while ago, and paranormal phenomena. They also started an interest in the psychological, sociological, and the political aspects of this, because this is the way our subject is. And this is important, an open and unbiased investigation of contactee cases. Because from the beginning, it was almost taboo to touch these physical contact cases. The scientific ufologists didn't want anything to do with that, only normal observations. But both Jacques Vallée and John Keel sort of changed that in many ways. So we started investigating even these type of cases then. And our first study was of the ghost rockets, the first published study we did. We collected articles from Swedish magazines about the ghost rocket wave of 1946. And here you have a photograph. It's one person from the military who is called Carl Gösta Bartol. He is at a lake called Kölmjärv, and it's the 19th July 1946. Several people saw one of these missiles crash into this lake, and the military were there and looking, didn't find anything as usual. At least as far as we know, they didn't find anything. In 1977, we did our first disclosure, you could say. We got a written permission from the defense minister at that time, Erik Krönmark, to examine formally classified material in the military archives about the ghost flyers of the 1930s. That was another wave of airplanes, at least what looked like airplanes, flying in very, very hard conditions, and nobody knew where they came from. And this was classified for many years, but we were allowed to copy this and look at this material. This was probably some form of espionage, as we know now, but then it was very, very classified for many years. This was one of our first disclosures, sort of. Here is just a view of our study and debate in the 1970s. The man down there, he called Åke Franzén. I guess many of you have heard of Mothman. I've seen a picture of Mothman. Åke Franzén was investigated this in the 1960s. He met all of the witnesses to this very strange being, you know, sort of a flying monster type. I don't know if you have read about it. He met all the witnesses and did a very good investigation. And he was part of our team at that time. Unfortunately, he is dead today. In the 1970s, we started to get more and more donations. Gösta Rehn was a very famous author, the grand old man of ufology in Sweden. And he donated his books to us in 1978 because of his eyesight. He couldn't read anymore, unfortunately. So he donated his books to us, which was very important for us. He was the representative for APRO, Aerial Phenomena Research Organizations, in the 1950s and 60s for Sweden then. In 1979, we changed our name to Archives for UFO Research, and it was the same acronym, AFU. And we thought that was very good. Arkivet för UFO-forskning in Swedish, Archives for UFO Research. We thought that was a brilliant idea. And of course, here you have the board leaders at the time then. It is Anders Liljegren to the left and Åke Franzén here. And you have Sven-Olof Svensson and Kjell Jonsson. And me, of course, then. We were the board members at that time in 1980. We couldn't keep the archive in a small one-room apartment. My friend Kjell, he had books and magazines all over the place. I think the only place he didn't have books in the end was the refrigerator. It was books excellent everywhere, so we had to move. And we got a small premise in Norrköping in 1980, and that was very important for us. This was our first premise and moved there, our collection. Today we have 10 premises, I can say, in Norrköping, 450 square meters of material. If you have a lot of books, you have to have a classification system. So we did our own classification systems. You couldn't work with an ordinary library in that way. But we created something called UFO code, which today we have changed to phenomena code, FEN code, because we have more than UFO books today. We have a lot of Fortean books, books on paranormal phenomena, and so forth. But we created our own classification systems, and it worked pretty good. This was a very important donation. I guess many of you have heard of Parthenon, the publishing company, which started in 1957 in Sweden. And it was a Danish lady, I forgot, Edith Nicolaisen, who started this. She died in 1986, and all this material that she had collected during these years was donated to us. And this is a remarkable collection, because here are correspondence with all the people involved in ufology in the 1950s and 60s, and all the contactees from the 1950s. You have original correspondence from Daniel Fry, George Adamski, Orfeo Angelucci, and all these people. And this, I don't even know if the Americans have this, because we get a lot of questions about this material. A very important donation for us, for research. The man to the left here is Carl Anton Mattsson, who was who helped us with this. And you have, of course, the lady herself here, Edith Nicolaisen. In 1986, we joined the national organization, Ufos Sweden. We have been on our own from the beginning. And unfortunately, in 1986, my friend and colleague Kjell Jonsson died much too early. He was the one that started the library, really, and that was a sad thing for us. But the work that he started continues today. In 1987, here we have a picture from the library then. Sven-Olof Svensson, one of the ufologists in Norrköping, came up to us one day and said, "I have quitted my job and I will work full-time in your archive." Wow, when does that happen? Someone says they quit their job to work free full-time for us. This is idealism, enormous idealism. He still works for us full-time. I mean, this is a gift from heaven. When does that happen? And that has helped us very, very much indeed. There are idealists today. We continued to look into the military archives as much as we could. This is a picture from the Swedish Defense Research Agency and the UFO archives from this agency. And we were allowed to copy the entire military UFO archive in 1987. And this archive is now in AFU in Norrköping. Of course, there are cases we were not allowed, of course, but all the cases that were sort of declassified, we were allowed to copy. And that was very, very important for us. This was done in 1987. The man here is Arne Gerdman, who was head of the sort of UFO department in that time. They had no money to do UFO investigating, but he received the reports passively. So then we could create a national report archive, like the Blue Book archive. Here you can see it, by putting together both the private archives, the private researchers' investigation, and the military records, and make a large archive on this. And it was very important. In 1989, Carl-Gösta Rehn, the author, died. And he had promised us that we should get his correspondence when he died, which was, of course, very valuable. So my colleague and I, Anders, we went up to his small house and asked his daughter, we are here to fetch his correspondence. Oh, that, she said. I threw that away a week ago in the dustbin. And we were stunned, of course. But you can take a look. You go behind the house and see if it's still there. And we did. And there, among a lot of old shirts and old things, we found 32 binders with the most fantastic correspondence with people from all over the world, researchers, you name it. An invaluable material, which is now in archives for UFO research. We were really happy when we found it. Unfortunately, we have not been so lucky all the time. Sometimes when we have tried to save material, they have said, oh, sorry, I burned it a couple of weeks ago. In the 1990s, we tried to increase our archive by also developing personal files, correspondence, organizational files, so in many ways. UFO group archives, local publications, because this is important for the sociological aspect of this enigma. We have many students who come to us from all over Sweden who want to study this from some aspect, historical or religious or something, and then this material is of great interest to them. In the 1990s, we for the first time had a full-time staff because of a government-funded unemployment program. So we could hire some people to work in the archive, which was very good for us. They could help us with databases and do a lot of work. We had about 40 people working for us at that time. Worked for 4 to 6 months then. Our archive grew, of course, and in 1993, we inaugurated our second premises. And we had a little party then with Russian champagne and sandwich cake, which was very nice. And of course, visitors from all over the world started coming in to look at these archives. In 1996, we had Hilary Evans, which many of you know, I think, visitors. He died a couple of years ago, unfortunately. Timothy Good visited us in 1998. And he was so impressed, so he wrote a check immediately when he was there to support the archive. And it was very nice for us, of course. We have many visitors from all over the world, simply because we have material that doesn't exist anywhere in the world, even from the United States. We get questions from the United States about material that they should have, but the only place they can find it is in AFU in Norrköping. We did a check in 2000. Claes Svahn, one of my colleagues, visited Center for UFO Studies in Chicago, and he noticed that our archive was larger. So from 2000, we said, okay, we are probably the largest archive in the world. As you know, Center for UFO Studies have had to abandon their premises today. They are having a lot of trouble, unfortunately. We are doing the opposite. We are increasing. A very important collection was this, the Boris Ljungqvist collection. You see here how we can look in the archive when material comes. Boris Ljungqvist was a Swedish writer who wrote, I think, 4 books on UFOs in the 1970s and 80s. And we bought a lot of his material. So it's safe in the archive now. Well, Dr. David Clark had this to say when he visited us in 2006. And of course, that's always very nice to hear, that he is not aware of any comparable collection in any other country. And I guess he should know. In 2006, something very unique happened. We received a grant from the Swedish National Archives for 82,000 Swedish kronor. 82,000. And we could buy these shelves then and for our magazines. This was quite fantastic. 82,000, that's a lot of money to receive. In 2009, another important project started. In Sweden, we have many unemployed, as of course we have in many countries. And the government has a program called Fas 3, where we can hire unemployed people and we get paid by the government for doing that. So now we have 10 people working for us as Fas 3. And it gives us a lot of money, a shamelessly lot of money. But that's sort of government funding in a way. But it means that we can do a lot of work. Many are engaged in the archive in different types of work. And this is our first Fas 3, Håkan Landin was his name. Hilary Evans died, as I told you, and he donated all his large collection to AFU in 2010. This was the largest donation we have ever received. It was a fantastic donation. I think it was 9,000 books. It was 235 boxes of material. A truck came loaded, full of material. And it came just as we had a small party, of course, in our archive. So we had to put on our clothes and carry these boxes here. But we, of course, were very happy for this. A very, very fine collection. Hilary Evans had collected material from all over the world, not just UFO literature, but about folklore, paranormal research, parapsychology, anything. So now we can say that our collection, in many ways, are somewhat better than the university libraries in Sweden, in some cases. To honor Hilary Evans, we made a special Evans library. And you can see a picture of it here. It is a fantastic collection of books from several hundred years old, mint condition, privately bound. He bought books from all over the world, and we are very happy for this collection. Donations come in from all over the world, so much that we often don't know how to handle it, because it comes almost on a daily basis or weekly basis. It comes from Brazil, Japan, Russia, Zimbabwe, you name it. Very large collection, because we are quite well known. We have worked since 1973, and many people know about us. So, how does it look today? We have 10 premises, 450 square meters. You can see here about 20,000 books, thousands of magazines, of course, articles. We collect everything. When it comes to books, we collect 3 copies of every book published in every country, in every edition, in every language. So there is a lot of books. We have 1 person employed and 10 on this unemployment program and about 6 volunteers. So daily, you have about 15 people working in this archive. You can come and visit us just like any other archive. This is unique in the world. So, how much time do I have? 1 minute. Oh, shit. Okay, some pictures here. Here you have one picture of the library. So this is the way it looks. Our working premises here. Our archivist, idealist, Sven-Olof Svensson. The men employed doing scanning and digitizing. My former colleague at Norrköping Public Library, who wanted to do something when she retired. She's now working for us instead. That's very good to have a professional librarian. My colleague, Anders Liljegren, and myself, of course. We do a lot of research and documentation, publish it in books, magazines. I have written some books myself. We have many university students who come to visit us. This is Bettina Sirén from the University of Linköping. She found us and thought it was fantastic that this archive was so close to her hometown. This is some special pictures. We talked about Fatima before. A couple of weeks ago, there were in a Swedish church, the Santa Maria Church outside of Stockholm. Some people thought they saw the Virgin Mary outside this church. And thousands of people came there. And there was sort of religious revival. And this, just because they saw a small figure in the window, it was nothing special really. I thought it was nothing special. But then I thought, how will people react if something like a real disclosure will happen? There are few people on this planet who can deal rationally with a thing like that. I think many will go to the gods and demons stuff. We will have a very problematic religious situation. I don't say that because I'm against disclosure, of course not. But I think there are many problems in it. I noticed this here. I'm researching the contact enigma, as I said. Here is two of my colleagues, Timothy Good, England, and Tony Brown from New Zealand, two who investigate contact cases. Very good researchers, both of them. Here is a book I wrote, Aliens on Earth, UFO Contacts in Sweden. Unfortunately, only in Swedish then. And you know, there are so many conspiracies around. So much talk about conspiracy today. And there are many people who think we work for the, well, NSA, CIA, or anything. And I used to say, no, we don't work for the CIA. We work for the HIA, Higher Intelligence Agency. That could be something. I have a hope that, have you seen the movie The Planet of the Apes with Charlton Heston? One of my favorite movies. You know, when these, three guys are going in the desert on an unknown planet and they start discussing life, and why did you go on this trip? They can't go back. And they discuss, why did you go on this trip? One is power type, or he wants to be the first, the brave man. He hopes there's a statue on Earth from him. The second man, he's a scientist. He would go down in a burning volcano if he got new data from it. And then they say to Charlton Heston, you are so negative. What? You don't like this, our planet. No, I'm not really. And he says like this. Well, I think so. I do hope so. Some of my cases indicate this may be the case. And if that is a conspiracy I'd like to join, I'll do it. Thank you.